Hey everybody, Gromos here with some more Warthunder tank gameplay from the closed beta. So this time I take a look at the two tank destroyers we currently have in the beta, the Jagdpanzer IV and the SU-85. Take a look at their characteristics and compare the two a bit. I did not play them much until the last testing session, because I assumed they would require a very defensive and passive playstyle to be successful, and I have more fun when I can play a bit more aggressive. I never really enjoyed the passive playstyle too much. But after playing the two tank destroyers a bit more during Saturday's beta session, I enjoyed the two quite a bit, and I noticed that they don't have to be played as passive snipers if you don't want to. Thanks to the mobility of the tank, I could adopt my medium tank playstyle surprisingly well for those two tank destroyers. Well then, let's take a closer look at those two vehicles. First, the Jagdpanzer IV, a tank destroyer based, as the name suggests, on the Panzer IV, and not to be confused with the Stück 4, which is also on the release tree for Warthunder, but the Stück 4 is basically a Stück 3 superstructure modified to fit on the Panzer IV chassis, while the Jagdpanzer IV is a new design. This version of the Jagdpanzer IV has a 75mm L48 cannon, like the Panzer IV, and almost the same power to weight ratio. So the vehicle gets quite a nice gun with a good penetration and rate of fire, and also a lot of useful shells to unlock. And as far as mobility goes, this tank destroyer is pretty similar to the Panzer IV, though I would say the Jagdpanzer feels just a little bit more agile than the Panzer IV. Agile enough, I would say, that the lack of a turret is not such a big problem as it could be, and most likely will be on other heavier and less mobile tank destroyers like the Ferdinand. But the Jagdpanzer can in most situations traverse fast enough to get the gun on target even at close range. You have to be careful with fast tanks like the Panzer III of course, as they in some situations might be able to outrun your traverse. Now, I'm not saying that not having a turret isn't a disadvantage, it is in a lot of situations, but I imagined it would be worse, especially at closer ranges, so I was positively surprised by both tank destroyers in this regard. Now let's take a look at the Jagdpanzer IV's protection. As a turretless vehicle, it has of course a much lower silhouette, so it is a bit harder to spot and hit, and the Jagdpanzer has a better armor protection than the Panzer IV, even though it might not look like it at the first look. The Jagdpanzer has 60mm of frontal armor compared to the 80mm of the Panzer IV. However, the armor is sloped 45 degrees, which increases the line of sight thickness and makes it more likely that a shot will bounce. Also, the Panzer IV has only 50mm on the turret's front, giving it a weak point in the armor protection the Jagdpanzer IV does not have. Thanks to that decent armor and its good rate of fire, I would say the Jagdpanzer has a good chance of deciding head-to-head shootouts against vehicles of its own weight class in its favor if it has to. But of course, most cannons at this level have enough penetration to have at least a decent chance to penetrate the Jagdpanzer's armor. So just like when driving a medium tank, I try to stay mobile with the Jagdpanzer and change my position whenever I can, to hopefully give the opponent less opportunity to fire at me in the first place. That is something I consider to be more and more important every time I play, staying mobile and try to surprise an opponent if possible, and keep moving. I think in a lot of situations it is even the best to fire just one shot and change position immediately afterwards. Of course, with the Jagdpanzer IV's good rate of fire, it is tempting to stick around and keep firing. But since the armor of the vehicle is pretty good, you can get away with it more often than in other tanks of its weight class. But this idea of constantly being on the move and changing position is the reason why I prefer the lighter medium tanks as well as tank destroyers over the heavy tanks like the Tiger or the IS-1. Even though I only figured out recently that the tank destroyers we currently have in the beta have enough mobility to be played that way. I rather have the mobility than the heavy armor. There is still a lot to learn on how to get the best results, but I think in the end the combination of a good gun and mobility will turn out to be more valuable than a combination of heavy armor and a good gun. at least for my playstyle, and especially on maps like Kuban, which I think is better suited for a mobility-based playstyle than the Karelia map. It is of course also important to keep looking around and scanning the surroundings to have a good chance to spot opposing tanks before they spot you. Now back to the Jagdpanzer IV. Overall a very good tank, and I can't wait to get the L70 version of this tank. The Jagdpanzer IV we currently have is an early version. The later version of this tank will have 80mm of armor in the front instead of 60mm, as well as a 75mm L70 gun, the same gun the Panther uses. The vehicle will lose some of its mobility as a trade-off, but with the L70 gun it will be able to take out pretty much everything it will meet frontally. Well, but for now let's take a look at the second tank destroyer we have in the beta test at the moment, the SU-85. Now, the basic layout of the SU-85 is similar to that of the Jagdpanzer or Sturmgeschütz, and like the German tank destroyers, it started out as an assault gun. It is based on the T-34, and originally the chassis was used to carry a 120mm howitzer for infantry support, and in that form the vehicle was called SU-122. When the Tiger and Panther tank arrived, the need arose for a stronger anti-tank gun, which in the end turned out to be a modified 85mm anti-aircraft gun, called the D5T in the tank version and D5S for the tank destroyer version. But the turret of the T-34 at this time was too small to fit the 85mm, so until the new turret for the T-34 was available, the gun was fitted in the SU-122 chassis and the vehicle called SU-85. Now, let's take a look at the characteristics of this vehicle. We already know the 85mm gun from the T-34-85, of course, and compared to the Jagdpanzer IV's gun, the 85mm has a similar penetration capability, but a lower rate of fire. Damage of the 85 is most likely higher, but I still need some more data to compare the two shell types properly to tell how big the difference might be. Overall, I would say the 85mm and the 75mm L48 are about on the same level, and it really depends on the situation if a faster rate of fire or higher damage is better. Now, the armor of the SU-85 is 45mm thick at the front. That is the same thickness than the T-34 has. However, the SU-85's armor is not sloped as much as the T-34's. 50 degrees back from the vertical for the SU-85 compared to the 60 degrees back from the vertical of the T-34. Now 10 degrees don't look like much, but the line of sight thickness increases exponentially with the sloping of the armor. That means that the difference from no sloping to 10 degrees angled back is next to nothing, but the difference from 50 degrees sloped back to 60 degrees sloped is pretty big. So the SU-85's armor, despite being the same thickness, is less effective than the T-34's most of the time, and also weaker than the Jagdpanzer IV's armor. With its reduced sloping, the SU-85's frontal armor has trouble stopping the 5cm armor-piercing rounds of the Panzer III, especially around the driver's hatch, which is a weak point in the armor. And because of its weak armor, you want to avoid duels with this tank destroyer if you can, because most tanks you meet can penetrate the SU-85 frontally, even at high ranges. So the SU-85 is inferior to the Jagdpanzer IV in the armor department, and on about the same level when it comes to the gun. That leaves one category, the mobility of the vehicle, and here the SU-85 really shines. The SU has the same engine than the T-34, and this engine provides 500 horsepower. But the SU is slightly lighter than the T-34-85 and therefore more agile. Now the Jagdpanzer IV is even lighter than the SU-85, but it has only 200 horsepower. So the power-to-weight ratio of the SU-85 is much better than that of the Jagdpanzer IV, and the wide tracks help with off-road driving. This makes the SU-85 the most agile of the higher tier tanks. Only the lower tier Panzer III and II beat it in terms of mobility, and the lower tier T-34 with its 76mm gun is on about the same level. And with its weak armor, it is even more important to use this tank's mobility for hit and run attacks. This works especially well on the hills of the Cuban map. Drive up to the ledge of a hill, scan for targets, fire a shot or two and then change position. Here the SU-85 needs a bit of discipline. It is easy to overstay your welcome and try to get just one more shot in. But with this kind of weak armor, the SU-85 is not well suited to take those kind of risks. However, thanks to its mobility, it is exceptional at changing position fast and great for maneuver warfare. The 85mm gun also suits this playstyle better than the 75mm of the Jagdpanzer IV. With its higher damage but slower rate of fire, it is great for hit and run. So overall I would say, just like with the Panzer IV-H and the T-34-85, I think the SU-85 and the Jagdpanzer IV are pretty much on the same level, with their own set of strong and weak points. It depends on your preferences and playstyle if you prefer the better armor and higher rate of fire of the Jagdpanzer or the higher mobility and damage of the SU-85. I personally prefer the SU-85 for its mobility, but both are fun to play. Well, that was a short overview over the tank destroyers we currently have in the beta, and they are a lot more fun to play for me than I expected. I am looking forward to getting my hands on higher tier tank destroyers like the Jagdpanzer or the SU-100. And well, that is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.